Howdy. I wanted to just briefly walk through FLEDGE to see if this would be useful for maybe a larger conversation. So if you haven't reviewed this, this is one of the sort of most important new documents related to TurtleDove and Google's advertising privacy sandbox, FLOC, all those bird acronyms. This is basically some of the actual rubber meat in the road here, where in this document, this FLEDGE document, we finally get some of the actual schema and the way that these interest groups are going to be labeled. And there's a variety of problems, edge cases, things that need to be worked out, privacy concerns, explained all throughout the document. There's quite a few of complicated decisions ahead, I guess, and there's also a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of really kind of cool concepts that are going to facilitate intermediaries, first parties, different audience sources, and some really interesting new logic, but it's complicated. And I haven't really seen a ton of analysis on this, and I've read this document once, and I've halfway made it through a second time, and the reality is almost every single line could be a full dialogue. There's just a whole lot of details, and a lot of links, as you can see here, even just one paragraph where it kind of explains how various proposals have evolved to where things currently are for this first experiment. So I guess just briefly, I'm going to kind of just go over the summary, and then I'm going to post this, and I may break this up into a few conversations. And I know I've had a few private conversations, and many other folks are as well. But I think it would be interesting for an audio chat or some sort of discussion about a lot of these concepts. So just to jump right into it. So this is basically a test, or rather this is the framework for the first experiment. So these aren't the results of a real live experiment. We've seen some of the grouping algorithms and potential quality. That data is potentially biased. Obviously, Google has a reason to try and pull the wool over everyone's eyes. But I don't think that is a reason to not closely review what they put out and understand what sorting algorithms they were testing and the rationale for the rolling up of a cohort, where if it's too small it rolls up to a larger cohort. And there's a variety of interesting concepts with that sorting algorithm, with the ones that they tested. But this is basically taking that sorting algorithm, which basically will be integrated into parts of this real-life experiment, and then instead of using the dummy data, which was like audio, songs, and movies, it's interest groups. So this whole proposal is these interest groups, cohorts, how they're stored in the browser, and the metadata, basically how they're described by the different entities in the supply chain, and then how those descriptions impact the actual automated bidding. And there's a whole lot of interesting sort of ebbs and flows of strategy in there, and particularly with the sorting algorithms and the custom first-party. There's some first-party power here that is interesting. And then the second bullet here, so that's just the concept of there's going to be a variety of metadata on the ingestion, on the pre-auction, and both of those aspects can impact auction results. And then the second piece is the privacy server. So this was the first and core edge case privacy revealing, privacy breaking, problematic issue that Google raised in a bunch of their documents. And this is basically just the concept of there needs to be some external entity that pings this cohort sandbox within everyone's browsers and is checking for cohort sizes. And if entities are trying to put you into a cohort that is too small, therefore unsafe, it needs to be a broken cohort and then not available for these auctions, and basically broken within that advertising sandbox. And this is a core problem because it's going to need to be an open source privacy server. Google is currently the entity controlling it now, but I think everyone in ad tech and privacy would agree that whatever entity is checking cohort size and breaking cohorts, and that open source code dictating that, one, it needs to be robust, constantly updating, because advertising companies are going to come up with lots of ways to try and break this. But two, those logs need to be destroyed, and there needs to be a clear auditing trail to ensure that there's no cohort leaking through that privacy server. So hopefully Google does better than we expect, and in terms of this initial test and the transparency that they provide, and hopefully they also provide a little guidance in terms of what should be some of the things we look for in terms of what makes a safe privacy server and that destroys its own logs. And then there's a variety of sort of interesting concepts that they outline, and this on-device bidding and sort of some of these sorting algorithms that publishers are going to be able to customize, along with block lists for publishers, and there's a variety of ways that these auctions are going to be able to be customized. And they're basically, at the time, right now, there's a lot of unsafe methods that are having to deploy so that these things can be tested, we can get some early data, and then start to deploy them in privacy-safe ways. So this is another one of those sort of intermediary concepts that is going to disappear at some point. So that's, if I was an ad tech company, I would be certainly looking heavily into this to make sure you understand the opportunities here. And then there are some interesting sort of supply chain, I would say, opportunities for SSPs. And I'm going to just do a quick search to see how many times they mention SSP. So there's 8 mentions in this document. And that is not an accident, where Google, in order to not implode the current data supply chains, where there's SSPs and there's pseudo SSPs, and there's many of these intermediaries, you really need to provide an optimization layer for this business type. And there are, I haven't seen a whole lot of feedback on this and how SSPs feel about this type of labeling, and how I see it as slimming down the industry from thousands to hundreds, where the bullshit is going to be transparent. But, you know, TBD on that, because there are custom algorithms and some interesting stuff with that some of these entities may be able to do, especially with their specific publisher partnerships, where SSPs and publishers may be able to have some special arrangements. And then there's a variety of interesting problems with, like, frequency. A lot of people are worried about that, where frequency caps are going to be broken. And there's these micro-targeting protections that they've also spoken about, where you can either show too many people an ad, or you could break privacy by showing too few people an ad on purpose. And so there's a weird happy medium there where some folks are really going to have to dig into those details, because it is certainly described as a potentially problematic area, and I think most people can imagine a variety of harms from that. And then this concept here, so they call it fenced frames. This would be Google's safe frame, or any concept of a banner or a video frame that is has special protections built into it. And this concept of a fenced frame is basically like a new iframe. And there's a couple concepts in here that really get into some of the other data transfer proposals with restrictions to cross-site data transfers. And this is a kind of an interesting concept where it's sort of like an iframe that can't do anything. And there's a variety of network. Let me see how often they've mentioned this. So this was definitely one of them that I have like quite a few notes around it, and it also was not totally clear in terms of what could come out of this. So I would say this is, when they say fenced frames, I would use Google Safe Frame as a reference. And Google Safe Frame is a very interesting entity. Google's custom search engine, GSC, has some interesting safe frames, and all of the double-click banners do as well. Sorry for that little bit of a tangent there, but this is an entity where I've always told people there's not many folks that spend as much time on trying to sandbox their banners as Google does, and I think this is going to be one of those times where we actually learn a little bit about what Google actually does with their safe frame, due to them needing to explain how to safely transport this data. So I find this one to be quite interesting, and something that hopefully we'll have quite a lot of discussions around. And then there's just a variety of little issues all throughout this, where literally this every sentence in this document should elicit significant discussions. Here's specifically one I just wanted to flag real quick, this concept of a worklet, where it's like, is this a service worker? Is this some sort of progressive web app? There's a variety of words and concepts that align with current concepts, but seem to be unique. And so I've approached this from a place of, I may think I know some of these words, but I need to learn them in this new context potentially. And I would sort of recommend a lot of people approaching it that way, where I think everyone has their own sort of understanding of 80 to 95% of these words, and then 5% of these words are either confusing, conflicted descriptions between people, or the nuance is actually important. And so something like a trusted server is a phrase that may get used, and in reality we also need to think about a trusted server is your privacy server looking for your K anon thresholds to break cohorts. And there's basically just going to be a variety of words that maybe allude to something even more complex. And so hopefully the industry continues to try and use these words in the context of how they mean, and we all start to get on the same page with the same language. Because I would say that to me has been one of the biggest challenges in discussing these concepts, are just everyone getting on the same page with the language. So If this has been useful, I may try and organize a group of folks, or just continue independently to review what FLEDGE is proposing for this first experiment, how it plays off of the other proposals, and some of the opportunities potentially, and particularly with these interest groups and how it's the data is starting to shake out of what fields of data are available and what is a privacy safe field, and DSPs, SSPs, publishers. There's a lot of strategy that I think can start to be worked on, and I'm confident there's a whole lot of people working quietly on this. So as I say this, I'm sure there's some folks rolling their eyes because there's teams have been heads down since this was published. But just the same, I would love any feedback, any interesting items that you think are particularly problematic or have some edge case, privacy problem, or are an opportunity for a new business. Because new supply chains equals new opportunities, and I think that if you dig into these details, you will probably start to see this as well. So thanks so much for listening to this rambling diatribe about a quite complicated proposal for changing the data supply, and I really appreciate any feedback.